1. Time swept into some distant era of night, haunted by an age-old odour of dust, of darkness and dead dreams. It was like some obscured realm half lost in time, disjointed from the neoteric age, with ancient alleyways into which one feared to walk, lest one would be beguiled by secret things. The stench of rotting quays built over stagnant tides washed to me on the chilly wind, and made me anxious to find the hidden place I sought. It was a place that had been marked upon a curious map found in a ghastly book, and accompanied by a faded photograph. I thought I had been familiar with the old town, but with the aid of this map I now explored a pocket of the place that had lain unexpected and unsought. I staggered through queer curls of fog, and followed the spray of mist that was my frosty breath, then stopped beneath one elder curved lamp-post to study the photograph again beneath feeble light, and when I looked up again it huddled before me, like something that had leaked out of a dream. I slowly approached the window with small panes, and peered into the dusky place beyond. I could not comprehend the twisted pillars that rose from various places of the floor, almost reaching to the room's low ceiling. I gazed a little while, until my cloud of breath fogged the pane and thus concealed the scene. I backed away from the blackened building, then spilled toward the narrow plank that was its door, a threshold that did not hesitate to let me in, and closed behind me without sound or force. I could not ascertain the source of dim illumination that filled the crowded room, the soft old light that was easy on my eyes, and seemed to charm my beating heart toward calm. The twisted pillars that I had detected from peering through the window proved to be piles of books stacked impossibly high and draped with filigree of spider-web. A drowsy odour of wormy age wafted to me from the books thus piled, and for some moments I shut my eyes and listened to the silence of the place where I was its single tenant of blood and breath. Yet even with my eyelids closed, I saw those twisted trees that were the piles of books, those balusters that seemed to hold the blanket of shadow that loomed above them, and as I watched them through closed eyes, I saw them lean and twist still more, beguilingly, so that their movement coaxed my limbs to bend until one thumb pressed against the floor, as the other touched a thing of smooth, cool leather. I opened my eyes and beheld the book next to my hand, and when I allowed my hand to open the book, I was confronted with curious symbols that might have been words. I tried to speak one alien word aloud, although my lips protested the effort, and yet my whisper seemed to float into the air, which echoed it beneath the wind that laughed against the outside window. I turned another leaf, and found a second photograph that revealed the dim reflection of a woman who was attired in a gown that seemed familiar, a figure that disturbed me for reasons I did not understand. Placing the photograph inside my coat's inner pocket, I stood and peered about me. I was alone in the room, no cellar in sight, and yet my imagination fancied that it could detect another presence in the room, someone whose low and subtle laughter sounded beneath the moaning wind outside the window. Suddenly I grew afraid, for in my fevered imagination I thought I saw the dark blanket above me sink a little lower and begin to churn. Perhaps the blackness meant to take the book away, and so I wrapped it inside my coat as laughter sounded once again, within or without I could not tell, and a burst of devilish wind thrust open the narrow plank that was a door, towards which I flew, until I found myself outside. I stood beneath the feeble light of an antique lamp-post, beneath the sky of a calm, a windless night. 2. I kept the book beneath my coat and stepped into the quiet harbour street, walking through heavy coils of diseased fog that rose to meet the tendrils of black cloud with which they intertwined. I could not understand the curious shapes I seemed to see within the yellow fog, the flimsy faces lacking strength or substance, that filtered toward me as if to kiss my visage with their melting mouths. A melancholy wail rose from the hidden harbour, perhaps the forlorn howling of some horn, perhaps the weeping of some lonesome beast. How curious that the faces in the fog curled their mouths as if in jollity. I could not understand the cruel laughter that echoed in the sickly yellow air. Staggering through evaporating things, I saw the outlines of tall and lean habitations that rose above and tilted o'er the lanes. I knew that this strange town was very old, and yet these habitations seemed to represent a fantastic past that did not wish to perish, of which these structures were an eidolon. Were they real and solid, the high and leaning things of brick and plank, or were they some freakish growth of elder memory that one may behold with eyes of lunacy? The hazy sight of them haunted my eyes, and teased my buzzing brain with crazy hints, and I felt as though they watched me on my way with keen attention. Perhaps they knew that I had looked into the book, and thus my mind had been infected with occult residue. Perhaps if I placed my soft eyes against their planks and brick, they would cool my buzzing brain with their cold surface, and I could rise with them, above the harbour lane with tranquil peace of mind, and watch the world in silence. Thus compelled to kiss one antique wall, I crept toward the nearest dwelling and placed my mouth against a window-pane. The vapour that was my mortal breath touched the glass as adhering cloud through which I peered into the place before me. I seemed to gaze into a haberdashery in which nebulous mannequins stood as still as stone, figures attired in unfathomable fashion that clung unwholesomely to their indefinite forms. Nearest to the pane through which I peered was a thing wrapped in yellow, tall and dominant and masked with a silken sheet that sheathed its dummy head. I breathed into the glass as I looked in, and hugged the secret book closer to my chest, and I wondered at the heavy beating of my heart, at how its palpitation echoed in the filthy air. When finally I brought forth the book from underneath my coat, my heartbeat seemed to sound within it, as if my pulsing organ had been coaxed inside. I opened the vibrating pages before the window and showed them to the yellow mannequin, as quiet laughter sounded in some obscure place. Within me or without, I could not tell. The figure behind the window raised a yellow talon and pressed it to the patch of my mortal vapour that still fogged the glass. A golden emblem formed beneath the moving finger, and I frowned as I tried to recollect where I had previously encountered the insignia. Something in its liquid shape disconcerted me, and thus repulsed I backed away as the yellow sign displaced itself from the window's surface and floated to the ground, where it floundered like some aquatic thing that had escaped its bowl. I fled the place and flew down darkened lanes through fog and shadow and harbour stench. The buildings watched my flight as I rushed past them, and I could almost detect the furtive faces that smiled at me behind the curtained windows. What kind of creatures hid within such dwellings? What secrets did they whisper in the dark? I sensed those rare whisperings pursue me, as if they hungered to nestle in my ear. Stumbling once, I dropped the arcane book, the tome that had captured the beating of my heart. It opened and heaved my heartbeat into the lightless ether. I bent and picked up the tome and clutched it to my quiet chest, as I, a heartless mutant, fled the haunted harbour lanes. 3. I staggered through the yellow fog, following the vibration of my heartbeat in the air, until I saw the house that grandfather had built when he was young, the place that I had inherited after father's death. It was there that I lived my little life in silence and solitude, where some few nights would find me in the dusky attic wherein grandfather's library had been stored. I was happy to see the clean black sky above my house, no fog or amber moonlight or winking stars. I gulped in air that was no longer tainted with necromancy or nightmare, as I pushed open the little gate and advanced to the steps that climbed to the solid porch. I paused for one small moment, and listened for any sound that might have followed me from the unwholesome elder realm. But all that could be detected was the faint pulsing of my lonely heartbeat, a sound that seemed to bend the air nearest my mouth. Whispering a weird little song, I removed the book from underneath my coat and opened it, and I laughed as my heartbeat fell again onto the pages which, quickly closing, trapped my mortal vibration once more inside the book. Pressing the book against my chest, I said a little prayer, and as the words were whispered I sensed my heartbeat pass through the book and return once more inside my breast, where it frolicked with my blood. My eyes were enchanted by the soft pale light behind the door's small rectangular window, and I leaned against that door so my eyes touched the window's cool glass. Before me were the muted and familiar shadows of my home, the silhouettes of grandfather's antique furnishings. I saw the double doors that led into my library, the place where I often slept on a comfortable couch with the book that I had been reading on my chest. Ah, what dreams had been inspired in that place by the books that lined its shelves, and what dreams might blossom in my brain now, woven by the heavy book found in a foreboding shop. Contemplating this, I pressed against the door with that portal, the heavy book in folded arms, and as I leaned forward the door opened against my weight. As I stumbled forward, my large foot caught upon the doorframe, and in my attempt to catch my balance, my arms flew outward and dropped the book, which opened as it fell before me and landed gently on the ground, caught by a adoring shadow. I gazed onto the pages before me, at the ancient script and bewildering symbols, and ached to understand the esoteric lore revealed. Clutching the book, I carried it to the library doors. But when I looked inside the room, it seemed too sane, its atmosphere too modern. Thus I climbed the steps that led upstairs, and passed through the door that took me to the other steps that ushered me into the attic where grandfather had kept his library of ancient lore. I did not often enter this attic space because of the way in which it had been built. The walls and roof slanted slightly in curious ways, giving the room a queer, irregular shape, and the air, inhaled, tasted dry and vaguely sour, so affecting my senses that I breathed in an unnatural manner. Electric light had not been installed in this portion of the house, and family tradition dictated that candles were to be the one source of illumination. I did not instantly light a candle because of the vintage tailor dummies that stood among the furniture and trunks and shelves of ancient books. The purpose of these mannequins was never explained to me, but something my father once said suggested that the feminine garb with which they were attired had belonged to my grandmother, a woman I had never known. Thus they stood like forlorn eidolons, silent speakers of an unknown, unknowable relationship. Sitting at a centuried desk, I lit a candle and placed my hands on the weird old book that I had pilfered from the curious shop. It was fabulous, in an uncanny way, how the candle glow caressed the leather binding of the book, causing it to lighten from dim brown to dark yellow. Gazing at the thing, I became aware again of the beating of my heart. I placed a protective hand inside my coat and pressed it against my chest, an action that reminded me of the photograph I had discovered between the leaves of the archaic tome. Slipping it out, I studied the faded creature pictured thereon, a woman whose face was a feminine copy of mine own, whose sensual body wore a gown that I had seen before. Lifting my head, I scanned the room and beheld the tailor's dummy attired in an amber evening dress, and I marvelled at the way the attic room's flickering light played upon the golden brooch pinned to the gown. I floated to the mannequin and touched my hand to the smooth, antique fabric of its attire as an aura of pale shadow encased the thing and I. Lifting the hem, I pushed myself beneath its yellow folds and kissed the sleek black wood of one of the 3 supporting legs of the dummy. Lifting higher, I ran my tongue along the rough surface of the feminine trunk, as my hands scrambled to the twin mounds that were its imitation breasts. I stood and turned around, as the gown fitted over and embraced my body. The ancient book was before me. Touching it, I pressed the pages to my heaving bosom, as some outside thing shook the attic window with faint fumbling. I watched the small window open, and tasted the different air that rushed towards us, and played with the frocks of my sisters. A breath of wind took hold of my photograph, and lured it to and out of the attic window, and reaching for my flat and latent image, my hand became elastic and spread toward outer darkness. Holding tightly to my book, I drifted through the window, into night.